So our last part of today is a mining panel discussion, and I'll get started on some intros for our panel members. Callan Driscoll is a PhD PE, is an environmental business advisor for Bridgehouse Advisors in the post-closure compliance team. She has over 13 years of academic and consulting experience focused on environmental work, focused on clean water, including groundwater, surface water, and industrial wastewater. Her passion for environmental work began at an early age. She was born and raised in the mining city of Butte, Montana, the largest Superfund site in the U.S. Growing up in a town fighting the stigma of Superfund, she wanted to make a difference in the environment and her community. After an internship with Kuipers & Associates that entailed residential yard cleanup in the smelter plume of Anaconda, she launched into her career as an environmental engineer. Her career has largely focused on regulatory environmental compliance, interim environmental management support, permitting, and water management in the mining sector. She earned her BS in environmental science from Creighton University and her doctorate in environmental engineering from the University of Notre Dame. She is licensed in Montana, Idaho, Colorado, Arizona, Utah, and Washington. Gina Ratcliffe is the Senior Environmental Coordinator for the Sandfire Resources America Black Butte Copper Project based in White Sulphur Springs, Montana. Gina graduated from MSU with a dual degrees in civil engineering and environmental science. After a post-bachelorate term at Los Alamos National Laboratory, she joined the Sustainability and External Relations team at Newmont's Cripple Creek and Victor Gold Mine. During her 4 years with Newmont, Ms. Ratcliffe focused on compliance programs, environmental risk management, and closure planning. She then returned to Montana to join Black Butte Copper, where she is part of the team working to permit and develop a greenfield underground copper resource. Ms. Ratcliffe is an officer of the Montana Women in Mining chapter, is a member of the American Exploration and Mining Association Society, and is registered as an EIT in New Mexico. Our third panel member is Selena Sauer. Selena is an environmental and natural resources attorney at Crowley Fleck, where her practice currently focuses on state and federal environmental compliance and litigation, as well as permitting and cleanup at complex facilities, including mines. After earning her BA from the University of Montana, Selena went to work for in-house counsel at one of the largest and most heavily permitted federal facilities in the county, Los Alamos National Laboratory. At LANL, Selena worked in litigation support and environmental compliance on a wide range of RCRA, CERCLA, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, NEPA, ESA, and state regulatory matters. Selena attended law school at the University of New Mexico, where she served as co-editor-in-chief of the Natural Resources Journal, earned a Natural Resources and Environmental Law certificate, and received the Albert E. Utton Natural Resource Law Award for Excellence in Natural Resources. Selena also practiced mineral title and real property law in Longmont, Colorado, before joining Crowley Fleck. Selena is licensed in Colorado, Montana, and New Mexico. Yes. Okay. And could the person on Zoom please unmute and turn your camera on? Okay, two more introductions here. William Pleasant leads the corporate sustainability strategy practice for Bridgehouse Advisors, a full-service sustainability and environmental advisory firm. He has more than 25 years of experience as a sustainability professional, ethics and compliance officer, and business lawyer. Prior to joining Bridgehouse Advisors, William co-founded a sustainability advisory business focused on investment firms and their portfolio companies. He previously served as Deputy General Counsel and Corporate Ethics and Compliance Officer at CommScope, a global Fortune 500 company, where he led the ethics, compliance, and sustainability function. William has experience helping companies across a wide variety of industries develop and increase maturity of their sustainability ESG programs. William is a graduate of Wake Forest University and the Wake Forest University School of Law. And lastly, we have Olivia Hipkins. Olivia, CFA, is the managing partner of Odyssey Capital Ventures. She works with investors and companies to integrate sustainability in capital allocation decisions, empowering executive teams to see sustainability as an opportunity for positive impact and returns. Olivia has worked with companies and investors spanning the real asset markets, including metals and mining, oil and gas, renewable energy, real estate, supply chain, and blockchain for real assets, on the myriad ways in which ESG can drive long-term profits. She previously held positions at Quenta, FKA Emergent Technology and Payments, 17 Asset Management, Castle Lake International Finance Corporation, and PIMCO. She has completed the Lead Green Associate, SASB Fundamentals of Sustainable Accounting, and FINRA Series 65. That's a mouthful for all of them. But with that, we'll begin our final panel session on sustainable mining.
Ah, there we go. Perfect. It's like reading the email. Perfect. Well, everyone, welcome to the Sustainable Mining Panel. We appreciate you all being here as part of this discussion in the future of mining. As representatives of the mining industry, we understand that mining is critical to supply raw materials and resources to support all kinds of infrastructure, including green infrastructure. We know that mines can provide many positive impacts to the communities in which they operate. However, we also recognize our history in mining, which is not always positive to impacts to people as well as the environment. As you know, we are sitting in the heart of the largest Superfund site in the United States based on mining practices. Of course, mining has changed substantially over the last 100 years, and we have had remarkable innovations aimed at preventing the problems of the past. There are many mines that are doing it right. So this discussion is aimed at the intersection of doing good business and sustainability in the mining sector, as well as how do we tell our positive sustainability story effectively. So we anticipate this is going to be a great, interesting panel. And we will leave plenty of time for discussion for the audience to question our panelists. So let's get started with our first question topic. Let's see here. Perfect. Awesome. So this first one is aimed at vocabulary. We want to get everybody on the same page here so we are all speaking the same language. So the question to the panelists, what do we mean by sustainability? What is ESG? And what is impact? Gina, if you want to take the first stab.
Definitely. So I think this is kind of the big question that a lot of people, in the mining industry sometimes struggle to answer. And when people in the ESG space kind of throw it out there and really just, run through that vocabulary. So for this panel, we decided that was an important place to start. So of course, kind of the basic definition of ESG, environment, social, and governance, is a big term and means a lot of things. So really, from my perspective, there's kind of two components to that. Is really kind of a value set. What's the responsibility of a mining company or really any industry to deliver upon those components of environmental responsibility to the community and kind of the social aspect of your operation. And then governance, really just focused on the way that you do business and what's important to the culture of your business. So really, I think what it comes down to is ESG being a way to demonstrate to your stakeholders, to your shareholders, and to your company as a whole what's important to you and how you are actually delivering on those values.
Great.
Thanks. So maybe just to add a couple of things to that, and I'll start with just a couple of thoughts. First of all, ESG is a phrase that wasn't even around until maybe 2018 or 2019, right? All of a sudden it appeared and it's become this huge thing, but it covers topics that companies have been dealing with for many, many years, right? Your health and safety program, energy management, efficient resource use. Those things are not new concepts. So ESG has been put over sort of as a blanket over things that companies were already doing. I'll also say that I feel like the term sustainability has sort of been hijacked in a lot of ways by groups with particular agendas when we think about sustainability in my career, it's really been focused on how do we make sure that we're meeting our present needs and the needs of our stakeholders, including owners, customers, employees, whoever those groups are, without compromising our ability to do that over the long term. So it's really become this sort of buzzword in a lot of ways when it's really just about good business for the long term. And that's the way we try to focus on it. And ESG really refers to these topics that we look at to help measure performance in business sustainability.
I definitely agree with Gina and William. And also, just a tad to what impact means, I think impact can mean several things, including being able to manage risk, legal risk, financial risk, being able to actually improve on mining processes through the ESG process, to actually have better financials and better legal results. And then also to get that, from my perspective as an environmental attorney in particular, with regard to the mining industry, be able to get that social license to operate. And that terminology, the social license to operate, I'm sure everyone has heard because it has been around for a long time. And it seems more and more lately, it is almost more important to have the social license and to focus on that, I guess, than to work with our regulators and get the regulatory permitting done. We know we can get that done. We don't always know if we can get the social license to operate done. So I think that's a huge impact, along with the things that Gina and William mentioned.
Perfect. If we could switch to Olivia's screen.
You don't have to put me up on the screen because I just see myself double now. Thank you for allowing me to join from all the way over in Greece. But, I think just to add something real quick, I think the rest of the panel covered the broad strokes. I think from the investor point of view, it's really a way to distinguish yourselves at this point. ESG is becoming a hot topic. It's part of the risk management underwriting process for most investors. Most people who've gotten any debt financing in the last 10 years have probably come across the Equator Principles. I think that generally ESG is just a part of operating in the mining space. I think there's a lot of noise, though, coming from the political side, from the news cycle. And my recommendation to a lot of practitioners is kind of ignore that. It's business as usual. ESG is a fundamental part of the way that we build projects and the way that you evaluate risks as well as opportunities to optimize value in a project.
Anybody rebuttal or?
I'll just add that pretty much every private equity client that I talk to says the same thing. It's just noise. Ignore the noise. We're not focused on a topic that's going to be that's going to hurt our financial results, right? This is just about good business at the end of the day. I hear it twice a week, probably.
Great. Let's see if we can get this switched over. The second topic is going to involve materiality. Of course, I need to see the screen. Sorry, guys.
It wouldn't be a panel without a technical.
Exactly.
Please tell me not everyone is staring at my face all the time.
No comment.
Olivia, you look great.
You do look fabulous. Perfect. How do we focus on what's important? What is important? How do you decide?
I would propose suggest maybe that William talks about materiality a little bit first.
No, absolutely,
Sure.
please. We can go in any order.
So just to level set on some terminology, in the sustainability world, we talk about material topics, not to be confused with sort of financially material sort of considerations for public reporting for publicly traded companies. But what we're trying to get to is what's important, right? And not focus on topics that aren't important for any given business. And so for a given industry, that might be very different. A software company has very different issues than a mining company or a manufacturing company. So the starting point of any smart sustainability program is to really go through and try to assess what is most significant for your business. And we think about materiality in two ways. Number one, things that are actually impactful for your business. So, for example, is it important for your business that you're fuel efficient, right? Does it move the needle for your business? The second thing we think about with materiality is what is the impact of your business on parties outside of your business, whether that's the community, customers, the environment. So we're looking at what is often thought of as or called double materiality, what's important to your company and what is the impact your company has externally. And based on a look at those topics, we can really narrow the focus of a sustainability program. So we're not spending time and energy on things that aren't important for a given business or industry. We have some help from various nonprofit groups or NGOs that have published standards that help to identify topics that might be material for a given industry. These are organizations like the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI, or SASB, the formerly Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, that issues industry-specific standards. And so it's sort of a shorthand on identifying things that are important for a given industry. The financial community considers SASB in particular an important source of materiality assessments, and we basically would go through a process with any company to try and determine what it is that they should focus on before they even get started. Anybody want to jump in?
When I think about materiality, I really think about kind of three main important things to consider. So ESG reporting can be either mandatory or voluntary. For the most part, and William and Olivia can chime in and correct me, for the most part right now in America, it's voluntary reporting, right? But we know that the SEC has a rule coming out. They've postponed it till the fall, but it's still coming, that will somehow deal with reporting on GHG emissions for greenhouse effects and climate change, things like that. We hear it's coming out. They just announced the other day that it is going to be delayed. So that's going to be, for publicly traded corporations, that is going to be a real material thing that they're going to have to deal with. So there's that. And then as far as investors go, I think Olivia will probably speak more to this, but we know that investors are starting to care a lot more about their things that they value, environmental, social, and governance, things that they value. They want to see it in the companies that they invest in. So there's that. And now for all the old John Wayne, old school investors, that actually equals, all of this actually equals the bottom line, which is dollar bills, which is not green as in green environment, but green as in hard, cold cash. And how that works is a couple different ways. If you have legal risks because you're not working on ESG topics, working through them, that's going to cost money. I hear attorneys are, really expensive. Second, if you have mining delays in anywhere in the process, from getting your operations permit, getting up and running, all the way through getting a new permit, expansions, all of that, that costs money. And finally, a lack of investors or investors pulling out due to these other things, that's going to cost money. So even for old school investors, these ESG concepts still matter. They're still material. Is Olivia going to go next?
I can jump in. Yeah, I mean, I'll keep it brief on the reporting at least. I think, like we were just talking about, the SEC is coming out with rules, but any company or any individual who covers any part of Europe as well, or works with companies that work in Europe, obviously there's already existing frameworks as well as regulation around reporting. And I think that to some extent, the reporting becoming mandatory is good, because right now there's such a divergence in the way that people report on ESG, and it makes it a little bit more difficult actually to think about what are the material things, what are the things as an investor or as the public do I need to understand about your ESG strategy and how it impacts your business and your bottom line. So I personally am in favor of some sort of regulation, just more for standardization purposes, as well as there are a lot of global companies that are already interacting with various regulations. So some sort of consistency is better economically, internally, from a compliance standpoint. On the investor side, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different viewpoints on ESG integration into investment portfolios. I think ultimately what it comes down to is most investors are intermediaries. So we manage other external capitals, sometimes our own capital. But I think that, most pensions and the large institutional investors are really pushing on this because it's important to the end beneficiaries. And for, I think, probably the last 20 years, people have forgotten that ultimately asset managers are serving their end beneficiaries. And so it's all kind of the flow, how people, how somebody's priorities start flowing down to the way that capital is moving. But I think it's really hard right now in the investment space. Not only is it a hard market, but it's really hard to raise a fund or have LPs who aren't thinking about the material risk of at least climate change. But I think D&I has become a much bigger factor in terms of the diversity and inclusiveness of different communities, different industries, all of that. It varies depending on the actual materiality to the bottom line, but I think that's why these exercises are important. I'm a big fan of SASB. I have their certificate. I think that the focus on materiality is really important for investors and kind of the full ecosystem, because you can get lost in too many data points and then it no longer is. I think it's really critical to focus on things that actually are financially material and drive capital decisions. And I think that's what the industry is moving towards.
I'll just add kind of one other thing, sort of from the other side of of the spectrum, that I think the platforms of GRI and SASB have done a really good job of functionally asking the question to investors of, what is important to you and what do you value? And I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that at the other end of the spectrum in the mining industry, to actually pose that question to the public, or to local stakeholders and ask them what's important to you. Understanding a full SASB document for a mining company is complicated, and it requires a lot of expertise in those areas. But I think there are opportunities to just ask stakeholders that have questions and say, what would you like to see? What material information would be beneficial to you, to help you understand what's our operation doing, what are the impacts, and how can we, as a mining industry, make that more accessible to average people who are not like myself included, really skilled in unpacking complex financial investment information that is not super meaningful to them.
Great. Let's move on to our third topic, which is on strategy. And how do you put sustainability into action in a practical way? Whoever wants to grab, go for it.
Jump in, since this is what I'm doing pretty much every day. So really the starting point, once you get past this materiality assessment and figure out what's important for your company, so we're not chasing every rabbit, we're chasing the ones that make a difference for the company. What we're really trying to do at that point is come up with practical ways to organize our efforts. And so we tend to think about things in a management system approach. So just like you would with your health and safety program or with a quality program, plan, do, check, act, right? We're basically just trying to come up with the policies for the goals we're trying to set. We're making policy. We're trying to increase competence in our organizations through training and building those cultures, going through some sort of monitoring or audit process, and then a management review every year. We're trying to build that continuous improvement loop so that once you've determined where you need to be to satisfy your stakeholder demands and to make sure that you're continuing to make the best use of your resources, then you just sort of set that top spinning and you go through managing it just like you would, as I say, any other ISO type of a management system approach. We found that to be the most effective way to see improvements in sustainability measures.
William, I have a quick question. Can you describe what a materiality assessment is? As I know we talked about materiality.
Sure. So that's a term you hear a lot in the ESG world, is a materiality assessment. And really at its most basic, it's essentially a disciplined look at what is important to your company and what's important to your stakeholders. And so just as a very nuts and bolts description, we normally would go through a process of doing some benchmarking research. We would look at these standards like the GRI and the SASB standards. We would look at peers and competitors, what they may be reporting on. We would look at or even talk to customers and other stakeholders, talk to investors in your business to get a feel for what's actually important to them, what's going to make a difference for them in making an investment decision or a purchasing decision. So we're actually gathering data points. It's still going to have some subjectivity, but we're going to try to create as much quantitative data as we can around those topics so that then we can whittle down the list and prioritize the topics through sort of that exercise.
Great.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just kind of highlight what part of what you mentioned, William, of the plan, do, check, act cycle is really kind of a foundational platform for many ESG programs and ISO standards. And it's really kind of a mindset, I guess, for many of these programs. But I think something, that I would suggest for our industry as a whole, and I think particularly, on the engineering side, every mining company does this. Every engineer does it. It's really kind of a way of thinking where you plan a project, you implement it, you evaluate it and say, how well did this work? Were we successful? And then you modify your next steps based on that process. So it's really something that, is highlighted a lot in the ESG space, but it's not limited to ESG applications. It's something that, everyone in this room probably does every day, whether or not they call it the plan, do, act, check, act cycle. It's already integrated in many parts of our business. It's, the next step is really to integrate those more ESG focused pieces into the day-to-day operation. So I guess going all the way back to the question as far as kind of how do we actually integrate these practices or these values, from my perspective, I think there's a lot of success in making sure that it's part of your everyday operation rather than, this separate, it's the environmental thing or it's the ESG thing. It should be something that, exactly like William said as well, that, it's something else that's part of your day-to-day business and is not a separate special activity that the environmental person asked you to do. And really that allows every person in the business to be invested in it and to have success in the project all the way along.
I'd love to jump in just on the back of that, because I think there's, when I think about from a consulting perspective as well as when I am working with a new company or with another general partner or investor who's thinking about ESG, I actually often use mining as an example of an industry that is already doing a lot of things that we define as ESG, but nobody has really like sat down and gone, oh, there's a health and safety plan. Good. Okay, that's part of the ESG. I think the mining sector, a lot of the material things for projects, at least when I've looked at them over the last 5-10 years, most of the material things are already things that are being considered. And so when I look at where to start in sustainability, it is often going back to saying, the processes you already have in place, what are those? And you're probably doing a lot of the things that people would expect you to be doing. You're just not necessarily labeling them as ESG. So whenever I'm working with clients or with other investors or with portfolio companies, it's always, let's take a step back and let's talk about what we're already doing. And I think the important part is keeping that top of mind, that's brought up at every board meeting. It's brought up at the executive meeting where people are talking about it. But again, a lot of those things I've always felt are already embedded in the way that mining does business. And I think that's something to keep in mind too. This isn't necessarily all new things. These are just relabeling things and really thinking about the impacts across the rest of the business instead of just, oh, we need to focus on our health and safety plan to not cause harm on site. But it also, the less injuries on site, the less downtime, the more production. It all kind of filters together, and I think that's actually one of the benefits of ESG and sustainability strategy in general is it makes you view the bigger picture and think about how each part of the business fits into that bigger picture.
100% agree with that. Probably every single new client I've taken on in the last year tells me we're not doing anything on sustainability. And then we start asking questions and they're doing a ton of things on sustainability. And it's just a matter of helping them see through that lens and then telling the story, which is an important part of what we're going to be talking about, I think.
Well, that's actually a great segue into our fourth and kind of final panel topic, which is storytelling. How do you get credit for doing these types of things? How do you get credit for your efforts? Perfect.
Okay, I'll start. I think Olivia and William will probably be talking a lot about reporting, the reporting systems, the SASB and GRI, which are really great ways to organize, I think, your ESG and report it out to the world. I really see also maybe a different and separate level of reporting, and that's kind of first identifying who your stakeholders are. You need to be able to identify your stakeholders right from the get-go in any mining situation, whether you come in midfield or you're starting out or you're in reclamation. And I think one really important stakeholder that may not be considered a stakeholder right from the start are the regulators, the state and federal regulators that everybody works with all the time and are so very important to getting the job done. These stakeholders, a good working relationship with your regulators is going to be really, really key throughout all the permitting and all of, the entire process. And I can tell you, I've seen it. I've seen, a company get in crosshairs with state regulators, and it's just really painful. It's like, why are we here? How did this happen? And it happened over, just a miscommunication, or a lot of times a miscommunication, or just unwillingness to kind of come negotiate, come to the table. So the stakeholder, the regulator, needs to be thought of as a very important stakeholder. The community, of course, whatever the community is. Of course, tribal governments, if you're working with tribes, very important stakeholders to be very careful with and to communicate with very clearly. And then the public, the larger public, for the mining sector, everybody is a stakeholder, right? Anybody who owns a cell phone, anybody who's using power, anybody who, uses any number of technological things, they are actually stakeholders. And we as a mining community could really, really effectuate, I believe, a big paradigm shift right now to get people thinking more positively about mining by putting our mining information out there, talking to folks. So there's that bottom line communication. And then, of course, another stakeholder are multinational NGOs who like to sue mines. And, I want to say, communicate with these people, bring them on board, see if you can work with them. But I got to be honest. If you go to a website of certain NGOs and you see that their entire mission is to stop every mine anywhere in the United States, that's hard to come up against, right? It's hard to communicate with those people and to come together with them. I think there was an earlier talk kind of similarly about this. But I still think we need to try, because maybe we can start changing the hearts and minds of even these people who are so anti-mining. Because let's face it, in the next 20 years, mining has become just as important as it has always been, and probably more important for America and for our national security, for our well-being, for our future. So, stakeholders.
Absolutely agree. And I think the key, and we see this in other industries, is taking control of the narrative about your positive impacts. What we see certainly in other industries is that companies are just increasingly receiving surveys, questionnaires, provisions in the contracts that are showing up for sales. Their investors are sending them new questionnaires, like with different data points they're being asked to report on. And that's all great, but you're playing defense. If all you're doing is answering questionnaires, then you're playing defense. And so one of the things we work with companies to do is help them more proactively tell a story using some of these frameworks, using the data points that we know we're going to be asked about by different stakeholder groups, but just get ahead of it and tell the positive story, right? And I think Selena is exactly right. Mining is critical. We know that. Everybody in this room knows that, and it's just a matter of making sure that the story gets told properly, right?
I think just to follow on that, I think part of the challenge with that really proactive narrative is that it feels scary. That a lot of the instinct in the mining industry is to kind of hope that nobody notices us, for better or for worse. But that really provides an opportunity where we're at today with this, maybe increased courage to tell people that we're here and to help them understand what it is that we do and the benefits that we provide, rather than hoping that they don't notice, maybe the more visible impacts that, that our industry does have. And it makes companies feel vulnerable. And that's a very, real reaction, but it does give us a lot of opportunity to grow in that space and to redefine a lot of assumptions that exist. So one other thing I wanted to add, I won't take the mic for too long, but I think going back to Selena's point about stakeholders, another important stakeholder that every mining company has, every regulator has, every consultant is their own employees. Those are an important stakeholder. That our communities are important, but our employees are part of the community, and they're really the first voice that every mining company has. It's the first question you ask someone that you meet is, where do you work? What do you do? And having every one of your employees also be engaged in in your business and really the values of your business is kind of the first step in engaging your community, because that's the first line that everyone's going to interact with. So I just wanted to add that.
I'm going to try to keep it short, but this is like one of my favorite topics to talk about. Obviously, I bridge to very unfortunately industries, private equity, which I was reminded this morning by somebody asking me if I'd read a book on how PE firms plunder from the common people, and mining, obviously, which I personally love and love as an investor, and have always really not understood why so many people, particularly now that I do a lot of clean energy, a lot of net zero economy investing, mining is so critical for those things. And I think there's actually a really interesting opportunity as some of the discussion shifts towards how are we possibly going to support all of the mineral resource requirements for some of these new clean technologies. The truth is we need more mining. And I think that this is a really good opportunity for the mining industry as a whole to really rebrand itself as not just coal. I still know people who work in technical fields like renewables who, when they think about mining, they just think about people, clambering through hand picking coal, which is really just not realistic at all anymore. And I think that that's partially just a lack of communication and a lack of transparency into the industry and how far it's come. And the truth is, politics also plays into that. People have vilified different industries, and we haven't really fought back. So one of the things I focus a lot within the venture space recently is talking about natural resources and how important they are for the future of the global economy from as a whole, or from a consumption standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint. There are a lot of different talking points that really lead to mining is critical, and there's a lot of things that we can learn from how the mining industry has tackled sustainability, both business sustainability through time, as well as the actual ESG factors, thinking about the way that retention ponds have evolved, how our employment agreements have evolved, how health and safety has evolved. I think those are really an interesting, growth trajectories that the mining industry just hasn't related. And I think that that's a really great opportunity. So I'm super excited about the mining space. I think I'm really excited about some of the new technology that's coming into the space. But the truth is, it's a call to action. We have to almost double some of our mining capacity in certain minerals for any of the plans that any country is trying to get to when it comes to clean energy. And I think that's a really big opportunity for the industry.
Excellent. Well, do you have another one? Or, okay, please.
Strategy still? Are we on strategy?
No, we went to storytelling.
Oh, okay. In that case, I have a question because I don't think we've really discussed it. And for me, when we were planning the panel, William and Olivia were talking about GRI and SASB, and I didn't even know what those reporting platforms were. So I would love to hear I did a little research just so I didn't sound like a complete idiot up here, but I'd love to have them talk about it a little bit to get a better understanding from an actual practitioner as opposed to Google as to what is going on with these platforms.
I can jump in quickly because mine's probably a little less structured. So I primarily use the frameworks as right now in particular as more of a resource and a structure, right? So ESG, I think going back to the original topic, which was the definition of ESG, I often view ESG as it's really a tool, it's a resource, it's another part of the toolkit when I'm thinking about looking at a project and thinking about the risks and the financial returns and how to decide what projects to pursue versus which ones need a little bit more work from an economics perspective. And I think SASB, GRI, TCFD, all of these frameworks have done a lot of the back research on what are the things that are material, what are the considerations to think about. And I think that there are more tools in helping you decide for your individual project or company, how do you want to think about these factors? What are some of the things that should be important? And a lot of the things, like I said, are probably things you're already doing, like reporting on injuries, reporting on greenhouse gas emissions. Those are things that seem kind of obvious, but the standards themselves provide standard ways of calculating those things. So the metrics that you should be looking at. And that's really what I use it for. So I try to keep, especially with the portfolio companies I'm working with, since they're much smaller, earlier stage, I try to keep it to, what are a few KPIs that are universally accepted for, material factors in their industry. And those are really the resources I use. Obviously, when you get bigger and you're a public company, those frameworks are going to be much more stringent in actually how you're putting your reporting together.
I have almost zero to add to that. That was great, Olivia. Maybe just fundamentals of GRI and SASB. They're both nonprofit organizations. The Global Reporting Initiative was a European nonprofit that developed, I believe, the first sustainability standards many years ago. It's evolved over time, but the key benefit is the ability to compare apples to apples. If everybody reports on topics using the same methodology, then you can compare companies more easily. SASB has been through quite a few structural changes lately. It's now part of an organization called the ISSB, which is also a European organization, which is in turn a subsidiary of the IFRS. I think that's right. The Financial Reporting Standards is essentially the global version of GAAP financial reporting. So this is for non-financial reporting. And again, the primary benefit is consistency in how metrics are calculated. So you're able to compare two companies using the same basis. Interesting that the two biggest probably organizations that are setting the standards are European. I think that maybe says a lot about the industry.
I will say SASB went through two different mergers. It was a US and now IFRS, obviously GAAP is US based, but IFRS, again, because Europe has a lot more requirements in terms of actual disclosures for public companies. I think that was really the mindset was instead of IFRS coming up with a brand new accounting standard for sustainability and non-financial metrics, they just brought SASB underneath. And like I said, I've been involved in SASB for, 5 years now since they were independent, and I think the move to IFRS is really smart. The U.S. loves to keep our accounting standards separate, but like I said before, if you're doing anything outside of the U.S., you're going to be, it's going to apply to you.
And I think that's an important point that maybe 3 years ago, there was this proliferation of standards. It was like huge alphabet soup. And so these sorts of consolidations have actually made things easier, I would say.
More strategy that I didn't get to bring up. Um, as a environmental attorney, I work a lot in the regulatory environmental permitting world, and then also on environmental litigation. And when I think about ESG, I think about the fact that miners already have to gather a lot of data. Let's say for NEPA or MEPA. MEPA, for folks from out of state, is the Montana Environmental Policy Act that kind of shadows NEPA, which is, of course, the National Environmental Policy Act. I probably do not need to tell you guys that. However, we gather a lot of data for NEPA and MEPA, and I think that the ESG construct, the strategies that you employ when you're doing ESG can really, really benefit your NEPA evaluation, and vice versa. The NEPA information can really, really, inform your ESG strategies. Now, NEPA is absolutely critical to be done correctly. It's a process, it's lengthy, it's really a pain. And miners who are working on NEPA with regulators, and regulators as well, really, really need to concentrate on these ESG concepts, because this is the place that miners get dinged in regulatory battles, or I should say, battles at the regulatory level with NGOs, with communities, and also, if those don't go well, oftentimes litigation to follow almost immediately. NEPA litigation is huge, and it's a nightmare, and there's almost always something that some court will find wrong with the NEPA or MEPA evaluation, no matter how small it is, and literally even the tiniest little thing can get kicked back, and either the whole project can be stalled out for years, or you can move forward with some part of the project and it gets kicked back, and all of the regulators have to go back in and redo everything, and it's like a nightmare. So I think with NEPA in particular, with environmental permitting, with Clean Water Act permitting, or state, here we have water quality permitting, using those ESG strategies to think, who are the stakeholders? What are they concerned about? How can we report correctly to them? How can we bring them to the table? All of these things can be very valuable to lower the legal risk involved with mine startup, which I see every day, and it breaks my heart. It really does. So that was one other strategy.
Anything to add? Anybody? Okay, great. Well, I think we're ready. So a big thank you to our panelists. Now is a great time to open discussion to the audience. I'll do the running.
I got a question.
What do you have, Amber? Oh.
You can go first. Okay, I'll go first then. So as a geologist with BLM, and I'm going to just re-emphasize what Selena just said. The NEPA process is difficult. It's time consuming, and it's a lot of money, not just for the stakeholder as BLM, but also you guys as the miners and your mining companies. FYI, BLM gets a lot of slack as well. We are just as invested as you guys, and I think being transparent up front, is very important. I tell my operators that all the time. Let's get down to the nitty gritty. Let's try to be as transparent. Let's go ahead and do that outreach with the community up front. Start. I hate to be cliche and be like, knowledge is power, but it truly is, and that's what our communities are lacking, is the knowledge of mining. Right? I mean, they don't even realize when you look at drywall that it's gypsum, that it's got to be mined. So, but BLM has a huge investment. We're not trying to be the bad guys that come on the mine sites. I promise you guys, we have our jobs, which are as regulators, to do this, but we get just as much flack as you guys. Believe me, Sierra Club, Wild Earth Guardians, all of those NGOs are have their finger on top of us as well. I talk to them on a regular as well. And so I think, as Selena said, doing these NEPA documents to our best of our ability and doing these baseline studies, whether that be, for wildlife or cultural, et cetera, are extremely important, because that's where we're going to be able to build these ESGs, such as stipulations or those kind of things, to be able to then build on what are the state requirements, what can we do to sustain this mine, So I just want to say thank you, you guys. As a stakeholder, it is very important for that transparency.
There's no comment or response, or that was just a comment, right? No, okay. All right, so.
Agreed.
So I'm pretty new to this ESG world, but I just wanted to bring up something that I found interesting. So I Googled mining company ESG, and apparently if you have a high ESG score rating, you're high risk. If you are low, then you're negligible and it's good. So I look at who is in the high and how we sitting. So just on this list from just a Google search right here, we have BHP at a 27, which is in the medium, Rio Tinto with a 31 and a high, Vale with a 35 high, Glencore 37 high. And then, Glencore is 69 out of 223. So there's 160 companies higher than Glencore. And then the second, I back out of that and I look at the second thing and I see mining companies with high ESG provide 10% higher shareholder returns. So do you guys have any comment, I guess, as far as am I looking at something wrong here? Or it just seems like that the mining community might have a long ways to go when it comes to ESG?
Well, if you want to take it, I can also comment.
I was just just a couple of quick things, Olivia, and then I'll turn it over to you. First of all, I think in my mind, the ESG ratings you see out there in companies where they assign a company that is a complex animal, right? One number to say that is its ESG score. I am super, super skeptical of that approach. What we try to focus on is a really individualized process with any given company. I do think there's a little confusion as well, because some ESG scores, higher is worse and lower is better, and other ESG scores, higher is better, lower is worse. So it depends on what you're looking at. There is definitely research indicating that the better a company performs on ESG topics, the higher the financial returns are. So there's a positive correlation between performance on material ESG topics, the ones that matter for the business, and their financial performance and exit multiples, I think Olivia will tell you. So there may have been a little confusion in the two different sources you were looking at, but I would say be skeptical of single point scores for any company and think more about how complicated your organization is and how can you improve the things that matter. Sorry about that, Olivia.
No. That was really helpful. It's actually a good segue into what I was going to say. I think there are ESG scores that are high. There are ESG scores that are low, where it's good to be one or the other. I am not a fan of ESG ratings. I think that they tend to be very black box. You don't know how they're being done. And I think that, especially just given the numbers you were going off of for the public companies, you think about a Glencore. Glencore is not very transparent. Their governance has never been known as being super strong, at least from a financial institution perspective, wanting to lend to them, versus, Rio Tinto. I did some work with Rio Tinto. I'm not sure what the difference actually is from that rating, but I think governance tends to be a lot worse off for a lot of mining companies in some of those public ratings, just because the headlines of anything that happens at a mine tend to be very dire, and otherwise you're not hearing about them. So I think I would always take a lot of things that is in the public with a grain of salt. I do think, like Will was saying, there has been significant studies just showing that transparency, active, like proactive management of things like permitting, things like doing your EIA with plenty of time to implement any changes that you need to make into either your engineering or your site plan. You know, those are basic things that I think do necessarily correlate to better returns, less delay, better operating margins, and ultimately, if you're looking at a company perspective, yeah, it definitely makes a difference from both a lending perspective. There's a lot less. I wouldn't say a lot less, but there's less risk, and so you're going to be, saddled with lower rates, and the exit opportunities, the multiples are going to be better because there's less concern around some of those non-financial externalities that you're not going to be able to control as particularly as a financial or strategic investor. So it's a great point, and I think it actually hits really well on some of the variety that exists in the market when people talk about ESG. And in my opinion, ratings have been negative helpful for a lot of the natural resources industries.
I'll add one more quick thing on that. I think you kind of mentioned, maybe we do have some room to improve just based on those ratings, which is absolutely true, and that's why it's a topic of conversation, right? We're learning and we're on that journey, and I think a big, part of that to focus on is not just some companies are better at it than others, but really kind of embracing the continuous improvement mindset where, not to pick on them, but maybe Glencore is not doing so good, but maybe next year they'll be in 60th place or something. That really the mindset is to improve over time, and every company, every organization is going to be at a different place as we're all still kind of understanding what exactly it means to be successful in the space.
Sandfire is doing it right from the beginning. And I'll tell you what, talk about ESG. You go to their website, when you see that, I mean, it makes me feel kind of warm and fuzzy. And I think that is a perfect example of one way, one platform, the internet, your website, where you can really highlight ESG. And almost all mining companies do. I look at their websites. They have their sustainability initiatives. They have their good neighbor agreements. Up in front, highlighted. And I think that's so important because most mining companies are doing amazing things for their communities. And it's like, can we do national ads with this stuff? Can we get a budget for that? I don't know. I feel like it has to still get broadcast more, out to kind of the public masses. Also, I wanted to mention, with regard to the bad press, I've been researching for this panel. I ran across this Government Accountability Office article posted February 22nd, 2023, and the headline is "From Gold Rush to Rot: The Lasting Environmental Costs and Financial Liabilities of Hard Rock Mining." I mean, so there's really this dichotomy between old mines with reclamation issues and new mining. And I think even though we can all see that dichotomy, I don't think the public sees it. They see a headline like this and they're like, oh, mining, it's horrible. It's going to be horrible forever. And that's where we really need to work with our ESG on this concept that, guess what, y'all? Those mines there was no environmental regulation, and nobody even knew anything about the chemistry of mining back then. So they had no clue that they were messing things up, or they probably would have, not done that. Moving forward, we're in the modern age. There's got to be that dichotomy. It has to become clearer to everybody, not just us, right? Oh, by the way, one more thing. Sorry, another cool thing, Stillwater. We had some talks about Stillwater, the 2022 floods. This is a great ESG. Stillwater does a really good with ESG as well. They partnered with my firm Crowley Fleck to send me down to Columbus, which is the county seat where the flooding was really bad, where their mine was at. And I got to work with all the locals on their 310 permitting and on their permitting for the Army Corps of Engineers so they could get riprap up on their property as quickly as possible so their property wasn't getting eaten away. I went down there 2 separate times and worked with the folks down there, and it was pro bono to all of the families down there. That, not only is it just being a good neighbor, they didn't need to do it, they did it because they saw a need, but also it's great ESG. It's great, the community loves them down there. And that was a very special experience for me. It was probably the highlight of 2022 for me. So it's a good example of how you can, how miners can make a difference in the community.
Yeah, any more questions? Wow, great. Perfect. I think, to the beer.